Is now 5:18. I'll call the Tuesday, June 18th work session to order. Would the city clerk please call roll?
Mayor Steve Gander.
Here.
Council President Mark Holstead. Council Vice President Chad Grassel.
Here.
Council Members Clarence Vetter.
Here.
Mike Parkshavinsky.
Here.
Tim Riopel.
Here.
Henry Tweeten. Mark Demers.
Present. Number one, consideration of proposed craft beer tour event. Representative from Leighton Broadcasting.
Okay, this is Mr. Brooks. Yes.
Hi, I'm Michael Brooks, General Manager of Leighton Broadcasting in Grand Forks. And we are trying to grow a new event in the community for both Grand Forks and East Grand Forks. Grand Forks and East Grand Forks too. Basically make an economic impact event that's going to bring people in from outside the region, and to really try to grow many of the events that are already going on in both cities during that time between September 15th and October 15th. As part of that, we've added several new community events. We're working with the Greenway Takeover. We did that with the mayors and several city members. Did the tapping of the kegs last year for our first annual Grand Toberfest, and that's what we call it. We are looking at marketing outside the communities to bring people in. We do several events. Bark in the Park is a family event that we do during that time period. We do an outdoor sale, tent sale, tailgate sale for recreational vehicles and things like that. During that time, we're working with the park on the 32 Below concert. Several other events that are going to be going on throughout that 4-week period. One of them that we're adding this year, or would like to add, is a craft beer tour. And we didn't have as much going on the East Grand Forks side, so we really wanted to try to get something else parked over here besides the initial kickoff event. And in looking at the footprint and talking with the guys with Up North Pizza, they've been very instrumental in trying to grow some more events in that area. I mapped out by the VFW there that they use for the Up North Festival, and they have the liquor license there that we would be able to use. We utilize an event specialist. His name is Cole out of St. Cloud, and he has put on several of these events for us to a high degree of success, both in St. Cloud and now we've added one in Winona. So we've had 2 years now in Winona and several years in St. Cloud, typically averaging anywhere from 1,000 to 2,500 people attending. The St. Cloud event is several years down the road, and they now have over 100 beer distributors that come for this, and they've got food and really no entertainment, but it's just basically a chance to try different craft beers. It's a very short window of time. It's all sampling. We sell tickets for the events, and then people can come in and they can sample different craft beers. And for us, it's just another way we were trying to get into the arena over here, but the ice goes in at the right, just couldn't time it any other way. We're really trying to find an indoor location, but just struggled timing-wise to make it fit. And so the Up North guys, were very helpful in discussing with us the potential of using that space. What we proposed is using, I did make a few copies of a map. What we're looking for is to use the space in yellow, which is basically the rectangular shape between Up North Pizza and the VFW, leaving parking directly behind the VFW. We wouldn't need that area. The area in pink is, if our wish list were to come true and be perfect, and we were to get additional distributors there, we would love to be able to at some point, possibly this year if it's available, to block off 4th Street, depending on the timing, beet harvest, everything else. I understand that may be a problem. I don't know that that's going to be an issue, but ideally we'd block off that entire area in pink to the south there, I believe it is, by 3rd Avenue. We'd block off just a piece of that and possibly use that parking area there. We're looking for, from the city's help, is to get behind it and let us know what we can do to make sure it's a great event. Possibly work with the city to help getting garbage and some picnic tables and maybe some fencing, things like that you probably have access to. Of course, we take care of all of the marketing. We bring in the distributors from all over the region. And of course, we have people come in and staff the sampling.
I have one question. Have you talked to Chief Hedlund about this?
No, this is my very first foray into it, so this is...
Okay. But would you expect to have this as an annual event in that location?
Yeah, absolutely. If that location works, yeah.
Do the local bars down along the street there, are they aware of what you're doing?
They have, I've been very vocal about, I've met with almost every bar owner and the chamber, CVB, the downtown. Part of what we've seen is that there's, the Blue Moose does a Oktoberfest, it's a one-day event. The downtown on the other side does a pub crawl, but the Wild Hog does a marathon, and no one was really marketing them to the full potential of what we could if we got everyone rowing in the same direction and trying to time them a little bit better. So yes, I have talked to people specifically and told them, HB Sound and Light, who does the Greenway Takeover, they're aware that we were looking at doing a craft beer tour. Most of the guys on the boardwalk, now I've talked to a few down there. I have not talked to the Sickies or Blue Moose, but Blue Moose, I work with their agency, Laura, and so far, yeah, I think everyone realizes that we're going to hopefully bring a lot of traffic on the east side here and do some things that are kind of fun. So,
Have you're sponsoring Wednesday night now, right?
no, this would be a Saturday.
Yeah, I say, but you're sponsoring Wednesday night for the motorcycle deal?
No, we are sponsoring, we do, at the boardwalk, we do a patio party there.
Yeah.
Yep. The other radio group does, iHeart does.
That's the other station,
Yep.
okay, yeah. Well, the only thing I'd say, the other station has brought a lot of people downtown. If you want to get people, you know, it's a good thing for the city. There are a lot of cities are handicapped to a great extent. We have one thing, and that is we have a lot of parking, but it's used. And that's probably one of the greatest assets we have, except for our people themselves. But I have no further questions.
Mayor Gander?
And now you're continuing with Grandtoberfest?
Yes.
And this kind of fits in along with that whole package?
Yes.
When
Yep.
is the kickoff of Grandtoberfest?
Oh, you'll be getting a memo on that as well. That's
Kind of
September, I believe it's the Friday, September 15th, or whatever that date is. So it'll be the Friday. And the Greenway Takeover was very interested in us doing something over there, but I told them that since we did it at the boardwalk and we did it along the river there, that we'd like to continue that, and they have a first right of refusal, of course, that we'd probably continue there, and the HB Sound and Light guys may be bringing some people over to assist with that. So, you know, I can tell you so far the feedback among the community, everyone has been very positive, because last year we put over $50,000 in inventory to promote all the different events. We promote restaurants and anyone that's doing something special during that 4-week period of time. The more that we can get people working together, the more I think we can bring people in. We've been successful at it in the past of growing, you know, economic impact events that really can hit that top 5 or top 10 tier as far as driving traffic in, like a street fair will. Some big craft shows, some concert events, and this being a consistent in that time frame really does work well. It does require a lot of marketing, and that's why having a radio group behind it works really well. And we do have sister stations we probably won't utilize St. Cloud at this point, but we are going to reach out to our sister stations in Detroit Lakes, Perham, and Fergus Falls, which cover a pretty good swath down there, and I'm working with the CVB to try to promote down there as well.
October is a great time to do these things.
Mr. Goss, did you have a question?
I do not at this point.
So are you asking for the whole area? Yellow and pink?
Yeah, ideally, again, that would be the best situation, because then it opens up the street between our friends at Up North Pizza. They put, I think their show that they're doing coming up here is on August 18th. I think they've got 20 beer vendors. We're shooting for about 50. And it would allow us to just have a little bit wider area there to work with. We haven't walked it off yet as far as the total square footage. I think that ideally, if we could just get 4th Street, we probably wouldn't need the south end there, that 3rd Avenue block and that other parking lot. If we could do that one block of 4th, it would be nice. But again, that's up to be discussed with you guys, I guess.
I do think beet harvest starts, and that would be a major problem.
Yep, and that's what I was thinking we may have an issue there. So,
Yep.
If that were the case, and if 4th Street is a major route, then, perhaps we could block off that little square on 3rd Avenue, and then go straight south to that parking lot.
I don't think that'd be a problem.
Yeah, so it'd just be a big, long, like an L shape there.
We had a bridge out by your station that beet trucks could cross over there.
That'd be nice. Yeah, that would be okay.
Chief Edlin?
In general, I'm very supportive of the idea. As you mentioned, we do have the Up North Rock and Fest coming up in a few weeks. I don't foresee any major issues with detours at that point in time, but as was just mentioned, we would have beet harvest during that time. So we discussed this at the department head meeting yesterday, and I think that was a significant problem. On the other hand, safety-wise, between Up North and the event going on in the parking lot across the street and traffic, I would be a little nervous about potential of people crossing there without, using crosswalk and proper signals, et cetera there. But if you're purely looking at it just from a traffic standpoint, if we could close 3rd and not 4th, that probably makes more sense from the city's perspective. Could we make it work with detours? I'm sure we could, but that truck traffic coming through there, it can be pretty heavy at times during the beet harvest, and there would be potential for problem when you're trying to move those big trucks. Any additional corners they got to take is that much more likelihood that we're going to have an issue.
It was brought up at the department head meeting there as well that the early indicators so far is that the beet harvest is going to be ahead of schedule this year, so that you could be in fairly good swing by that point.
And that's possible. So
there's a lot it's very weather dependent and a lot of unknowns between now and then, but the indications are at this point is what we've heard is that it is ahead of schedule.
So I would certainly support it at a minimum with 3rd, and perhaps with the caveat of weather and traffic dependent. We would have to get approval from Minnesota DOT, though, to be able to close 4th in that area.
Right. So does anybody have an issue with closing the proposed area in yellow, and then the 3rd, and then the parking lot?
I guess I would say if there would be a way for 4th, only from a standpoint that, one of the main connections to Up North, whether it is a pedestrian safety or even creating that connection, I would, if they were sitting at this table, I would think they would be pretty strongly hoping at least to keep the flicker of hope open to bring forth also, even for maybe a narrow window of time. And maybe the event, it
is 1 to 5.
Yeah.
So it's a short window.
Yeah.
And my only concern there is if there are a lot of trucks moving through there, they can't stop real fast. And so, if we are in that, and of course, I wasn't privy to beet harvest and that being a route. So that was only brought up recently. But
that's why I mentioned that the safety issue, if we do keep it open. And so there's the negative of disrupting the traffic, but there's also the negative if you leave it open, there's the negative safety issue.
Yes.
So the worst thing we could do is push them down Demers over to behind Burger King and across. Correct? That would be the
one block around is
right.
How we're planning on having a D2 sign set up during the Rock and Fest.
Do you go to 3rd, or would you go some other way? Is it over here?
5th.
Oh, to 5th, okay.
5th and over. You could go to 3rd as well, but 5th, and they're able to just turn right back on.
Because if we
basically a one block.
My question is for then, Megan, we have to go to the DOT again
Yes.
and get that approval.
Yep. And it's a form to fill out, and I would need a certificate of liability with a state listed, and we can work on that.
So everybody feel comfortable doing that? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I guess I would agree that probably Up North and and Leighton would approve that, but I think we should talk to our biggest taxpayer before we decide to just change their routes. I've been supportive of the event that they're going to put up in a couple weeks, and I would love to see this come off as well, but agriculture is our bread and butter around here, and I think that we should rotate around that axle and not move other things around, or move that around other people's axles. Like I said, if we can make it work and they're fine with it, I'd be fine with it, but I think that we should invite them to the table first.
And I would be agreeable to talk to them too, if we have to do some things to make it worth their while. And, they're obviously, with the beets being a big part of our community, and somehow helping them. We do a lot of beet harvest reports and things like that we could obviously help out. But, if we were able to block that section of 4th, it would only be for that small window of time, and then we probably wouldn't have to worry about the 3rd and that other lot. So, there's options, I
All
think.
right, so Megan, you will continue to work with him?
Yep, and if it's okay with you, I think we'll get in contact with Lloyd Kennedy, who is a he works out at the beet factory. And we can just touch base with them and kind of run this past them as well, get their perspective.
Reid, go ahead.
What I would do is I would recommend, even if we're considering it, to put in the application to be able to close it, and then we can have the choice one way or another, depending upon what you come up with.
Yep.
Go ahead, please.
It's certainly not as important as road issues, but a couple things to note from our perspective is that weekend is the Art and Craft Show, so that'll be more traffic going there too, with bus routes from the Civic Center to the VFW Arena. And just so nobody's surprised by it, with Up North Rockin' Fest, the Park and Rec Department set up all the snow fence, picnic tables, garbage cans. We did all of the work for that because it's the Art and Craft Show, and we have intensive setup of our buildings for that. I think the equipment would be available, but maybe not the expectation that our department would have the time or manpower to do that work for that specific date.
Okay. Thanks, Reid.
Thank you.
Well, we'll continue to be in touch. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Okay. Number 2, discussion on Red Lake River Corridor grant application and projects. Reid.
Thank you. Okay, so kind of bringing this back from a couple of work sessions ago, I have a couple of projects. They're relatively similar to what we discussed 2 or 3 work sessions ago that I think could be included in a grant application to the Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails Commission. In your packet, you should have 3 projects. One of them, the first one being a kayak or canoe launch, the second one being a fishing pier, and then development kind of work on the area around where that fishing pier would be located on the confluence of the Red Lake and the Red Rivers at the Forks. And the third one with Mr. Demers' recommendation of just, I called it signage and vehicle access barriers, but basically the treated posts and or landscape rocks, boulders that could be scattered all over the greenway in any areas that we have vehicles accessing places they're not supposed to by vehicle. So 3 separate projects to be submitted. Again, this would be the fiscal period that this would, if we were approved for, it would be starting July 1st, 2019 and terminate June 30th, 2022. So that would be the budget cycle that our local match would have to come into should we be awarded a grant through this process. Each of the 3 projects, I submitted them for you to review with a 25% local match. That 25% local match is not required by the grant, but it's suggested that we apply at that rate. The Joint Powers Board of the corridor, which of course is made up with basically every community along the river from Thief River Falls to East Grand Forks, everybody is trying to make a consensus effort this year to meet that 25% match because if you do so, you score the highest points in their scoring criteria, the commission scoring criteria, when they look at who they're going to fund and who they're not going to.
Get 15 points for that 25% on their scoring.
Correct. So just more than anything, I guess there's two folds to this. Is one, if there's any comments on the projects that are in front of you, if you're comfortable moving forward with all three of these projects, if you have any edits that you'd like to see. And then for the next council meeting, there is a resolution that would need to be passed. It doesn't state a financial commitment. It basically just says that we support the projects that are described in the application, and should we receive funding, we'll support them. So I'll take any questions or comments from there.
Any questions?
Oh, when would we know about it, if we got the grant or not?
Based off of past practice, I think it was in February of 2018 that we found out about last year's grant cycle, so I would expect February 2019. And then again, there is, as the other communities are learning this go-around, there's a lot of prep work that has to be done before you can start spending the dollars, especially being it's along the river. There's a lot of environmental analysis that needs to go into it before you get approval. So it's not as instantaneous as knowing you got the money and you can buy the pier. There's a lot more that goes through it before you can finally start buying the stuff, which is why that window for the financial is 2.5 years long.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good, Reid. Thanks.
Thank you.
Number 3, 2019 MNDOT transit application for fixed route and dial ride. Nancy?
I'll just be brief because I think you guys have seen this probably 5 to 6 times in the last year. So budget for 2019, while you see the overall total of the fixed route quite a bit more than normal, if you take out what the state is going to pay for, which is the expanded service, our service ends up right about at that normal rate of about $335,000 to $350,000 with my salary included. So what this essentially does is allow us to apply for state dollars. They use a number of different things to determine how they're going to fund it, but they're still willing to fund it at that 80-20 for federal, and dial-a-ride is 85-15%. So between now and next year in August, I'll be working with my federal partner out of Denver and the state to agree to provide some more funding so that we don't have a lot of general funds that will have to go towards the service. Just as a note, all of our new routes start on Monday. We've almost, oh goodness, we've at minimum doubled our revenue hours that will be providing service to people in East Grand Forks. While Grand Forks thinks that the city's area transit is noticeably favoring East Grand Forks in favor of their own residents. After reviewing it with 20 different passengers that have complained, we've actually made their service quicker and more reliable, so with less transfers. So we're hoping that this is favorable. So I guess what I'm asking is if we can move on just the 2 resolutions that I need to put together the application, and then you will again see the transit budget in probably August when we have more final numbers. So
You're talking 3 and 4 here.
pardon me, that's 3.
Okay.
So does anybody have any questions? No? Okay. So 4.
On to number 4.
Yep. Back in 2006, we had a memorandum of understanding with the city's area transit and the city of Grand Forks for operations of our service. We are updating that to a memorandum or master operating agreement, which is more of what the federal government and the state transit agencies are wanting. We did not include any attachments because it's over 700 pages long and includes all of the plans and requirements that we need from both the state and our federal partners. They have their own attorneys that review that, and so they are fairly comfortable with those plans. And I did not include it.
I think we should have a PowerPoint on that.
Yeah. So what this is, in a sense, is because we're doing new routes and they're providing some additional service for us, we thought it would be in our best interest to update that agreement, make sure that I've continued to have oversight, because the last agreement had the MPO as providing that transit manager, so now the city has a full, someone that handles that, doing all the requests that the state is asking me to do, more oversight in the cost allocation model, more oversight in the vehicle maintenance, more oversight in their building maintenance, just kind of more meetings. So that's what it entails. There's some insurance questions that we're trying to get resolved between Ron and Howard Swanson over in Grand Forks. Not quite, we've had troubles with this before. However, there are numerous transit agencies that are by state, and they have those agreements, so we're going to try to pull those and try to write something similar. So if you have any questions of Ron, he can address that. But
essentially, I have had an opportunity to go through this. I was going, it was a similar agreement that we were discussing and drafted back in 2011, 2012, where there ended up being some issues regarding the insurance, and then it just kind of died. It was turned over to Scott Husengay at that time, and I think the last email or correspondence that I saw was in April of 2012. And so it really just didn't go anywhere. I did speak with Dale Burgum today, who's in charge of the Transit Authority over in Grand Forks. I am waiting for some materials from him before I contact Mr. Swanson. The last time we had this issue, it was fairly a narrow issue regarding whether or not the North Dakota State Insurance Reserve Fund would include the state of Minnesota as an additional insured on the insurance, because they are where the vehicles are being housed. And I did speak with Dale, and I'm getting the information from the city of Moorhead and the city of Fargo to go through at least the insurance portion of their joint powers of agreement, because at this point, it's my understanding that the state of Minnesota is considered is listed as an additional insured down there. I'm not sure if there's been some separate endorsement that was purchased or entered into regarding the insurance, so I'm looking into that. Dale's supposed to be providing that to me tomorrow, and then we'll move forward with it. I did get an opportunity to glance at these 724 pages, of which the only thing that was really interesting to me, and I think you may want to take a look at, would be just the cost formula on the sharing, because it's been very well done. There's 2 spreadsheets. The formula is out there, and right now that form has actually been transferred from Grand Forks and us developing it to being utilized in many of the states nationwide. So it pretty much just lists how the cost share is going to be done between revenue and hours and miles and everything else. Other than that, they're just operating manuals for employees and emergency plans and transit plans.
Any other questions for Nancy?
So what we'll do is we'll just move it forward with preliminary approval until Ron and Howard meet, and we've got all of that cleared out, and then we'll bring it back for final approval. So.
Okay, thank you. Discussion on parking information. Nancy.
I think it was beginning of June, was it? I was asked to pull together some parking information. You were sent out the parking study that was completed for the city of East Grand Forks through the MPO, and I provided you with that information. At this meeting, I'm providing you with both the current Grand Forks ordinance and how they provide their parking kind of assessments, and I wouldn't call it an assessment, but more of a parking charge. And then what their parking study has included and some of the changes that their consultant had presented to them. And so I just want to go through quickly of the bullet points that were brought to my attention from Ryan Brooks, who currently is operating the parking ordinance over there. Right now, they currently go on a use base. So there's a number of different uses, and they take those spots based on the use. And it's based per business, not based on the property owner. So therefore, they're dependent on either the new business to come in and notify them, or they have to have some way of determining all of the businesses in their downtown area and then determining what the use is and billing them. They bill them quarterly, so they kind of check on that every 4 to 6 months. Like I said, they're currently charging business owners and not property owners, therefore they can't assess the property. It's based solely on a billing system, and if they do not receive that, it goes to a collection agency. How they do it right now is it's based on that use. They determine the number of spots that are needed. They take the budget as a whole, and they started with just a generic budget. That includes other ramps and their parking lots. And after the first year, if they had excess funds, that was removed from that. Let's say if they budgeted $90,000, it was removed from that. And then they took the number of spaces, and that's how they determined total spaces, what their spaces were, and then that's how they determined it. If there was additional charges or work that needed to be done at the parking ramp, and it cost them $140,000, then that additional $50,000 was added to the budget for the next year, and then your amount that you paid went up. So it is a fluctuating type of a bill. So every year it could be more or less. It's not really a set amount.
I can tell you it's never been less.
And I would believe that. The one thing that they have never done is they have never set aside any, like a blanket or a budget amount, let's say $50,000 per year, to pay for any major improvement, capital improvements that they would need on their parking spaces. So if in fact they were to have a ramp that had a severe structural issue, that would be tacked on the next year, and then you bill it out, and if somebody doesn't pay, then you have to go after the business and through a collection agency. So right now it's kind of a, it's.
I think they want to change it to where it's actually.
They do.
The building owner.
Yep.
And then that could go onto their county taxes.
Yep, so that is what they're proposing, is rather than going with a per use, they want to look at like a gross floor area. So it would be 3.15 spaces per gross floor area of that building. So unless the building is torn down, it doesn't matter if it's being used or not being used. They're still paying for those spaces, and then it is assessed once a year onto their taxes. And however that property owner decides to collect those, from their renters or their tenants, that would be up to them, but it's definitely an easier way for them. They send it into the county assesses it.
What you lose with that is some uses have way more traffic than others. So the minute you go to square footage, you lose that connection between traffic generation, the numbers of people that you bring in, therefore the number of cars that you use in your space.
There's a engineering metric for type of business
Yeah.
times square footage.
Yeah, they have that all
And
broken
it's-
out in the spreadsheet
Yeah.
here.
And it's pretty
And that would
standard.
be, you could still do that, but that would be on the onus of the property owner rather than on the onus of the city.
Okay, so
to-
you could maintain those differences.
Yeah, if
Just-
I were, if I were a property owner, I could decide, oh, okay, I have to pay for 78 total spaces, but if one of my tenants is a restaurant, they may, I may determine from a metric that they're going to pay 80% of that, whereas, a trophy store or something like that probably doesn't generate the same type of traffic. And then
Well, if
that
you're a
would be
really
up to.
good trophy store.
Yeah, that would be up to.
Lose money every day.
That would be up to the property owner rather than the city to try to maintain who is that business and what, because it is definitely a fluctuating type of a thing. So, it's completely up to you how you want to proceed. Grand Forks, visiting with Ryan, he did suggest that when you start, you take a look at all of the costs that you may have. He said also include any snow removal for sidewalks, anything in and around your parking lots, any grass mowing in and around your parking lots. He said add a fixed amount for capital improvement that you can put in to a kitty, and then if you get to a certain amount, you could always pull it off of your budget if you want to, but you would have a set aside. And then he also suggested the square footage at that point. I was unable to get a hold of Jason and Jeremy last week to kind of get some of a general idea of what our costs are currently. I do have that information and I can email that to you tomorrow. Just looking at the large parking lot behind the movie theater and the VFW parking lot, and just snow removal, striping, and some of your incidentals like patching, those types of things, we're at about $60,000. Per year. Now, that doesn't include any of the snow removal that like Parks and Rec would do. That doesn't include some of the smaller lots that weren't addressed in the parking study. So even just at a rough estimate, with the snow removal and the grass and some of the stuff that I do in the downtown area, I would say 80,000 would be ballpark, just so that we're addressing the 60,000 plus, the additional 10 to 20,000. We could get a more defined based on work order, but it's always good to estimate high and then.
But it's important to note that it doesn't include any capital. That's just our
Our
costs.
That's just the operations. Yep, maintenance. Yep, current costs, year to year. So.
Mayor Gander.
I should tell you, I had a conversation with one of the larger businesses in our downtown district about this item, saying, what do you think about the possibility of being charged now for some maintenance on the parking lot? So again, he would be one of the larger businesses down there, and he said, I have no problem with it as long as everybody pays the same.
Not the same rate, the same amount.
I think the same dollar. Yeah, the same dollar
Take the
amount.
total divided by the number of businesses. Perfect.
So he's on board.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Nancy? I think this is something, I looked through it, but the more you look at it, I think you're going to have to take some time to digest and
Yes.
figure out which direction, if we want to go anywhere with it at all.
I kind of gave you the bullet points, so if you guys come to a decision where you want us to start addressing, or come to an agreement on how many spaces, like if you're going to go square footage or if you're going to go use, how you want to do it in terms of, property owner, business owner, those types of things, I can work with the different entities and we can pull some of those out from, we do have a pretty good ordinance from Grand Forks that we can adjust and kind of throw into, so.
Murphy, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess one thing I just wanted to comment on this is in speaking with Nancy about this after she spoke with Grand Forks, I think they were extremely helpful, and I think the big thing that came across, what they tried to convey to her, was these are the things that we learned in our process, and these are some, maybe, I don't know if I say some of the mistakes that we made that we would suggest that you try to avoid when you do something like this. So I think what they gave us as far as suggestions are are pretty good advice that we should take a pretty close look at. That's all I have.
One more thing.
Eric Gander.
The good news is, to this annual expenditure, we're currently covering it from the general fund. Okay, so it's not like this is a new expense. It's an expense that we're very familiar with, and it's an expense that we've covered, again, every year out of the general fund. Now, I would hope that if we start something like this to some dollar per year, we could think of it as parking lot maintenance. And since we're already finding a way to pay the snow and the patching, perhaps we could establish a fund that would go toward some long-term savings for when those things have to start being replaced panel by panel. Those will become some big expenditures. So that would be my 2 cents worth, rather than, you know, just offsetting this from next year's or whatever year we do it, general fund allocation, that we actually set up a fund intentionally for the long-term replacement of areas of that parking lot when it becomes necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would tend to agree, and I think when we focus about the details of how we're going to do, or the mechanism of how we get the revenue to pay for something, obviously that's kind of where the nitty-gritty of it is going to end up. I think, you know, obviously that's what politics is who pays for it and how. But before we do that, I think we're missing that important step, as the mayor said, is coming up with a baseline 0-year total expenditure. What do we need? And I think the reason why you need to do it that way is, number one, to have some sort of validity to your argument. You know, if you don't come up with the number that you need first, and then you try to divvy it up from that, you know, then you're just guessing, then you're just trying to shoot in the dark. It's not a terribly difficult computation. I mean, I know our engineering staff, or engineering, we did that for all the streets in East Grand Forks. So we can figure out that number and amortize that out, you know, take away the current age of stuff and figure out what the cost is right here. And just like we did with our wastewater, you know, you can pencil that out to 20 years or 40 years and figure that out. And I would say, like you said, let's dedicate that fund and let's start charging for it. I mean, if we were a business, we wouldn't just eat the money, you know, and do it. And I'm not saying try to dedicate anything, just put it on our general fund and say, this is what it's costing. Let's be realistic about not just today, but like you said, in 10 years, in 30 years, this is what it's going to cost us. And we'll find out real fast from, you know, residents all over how much parking we should have, where we should have it, and who should pay for it. I think that makes that decision a lot easier. You know, I think if you try to force it from the other end, I think you just start with the fight and nobody really knows what the cost is. So I guess I would prefer coming up with a real solid, this is what it's going to cost. And, you know, we could say
have that number back when we did the parking study. Greg Beaupre had put together.
Right, but there's been some changes, and, you know, we're going to pay some, yeah, and so whatever. So it would need to be updated and brought up to date to, you know, current, you know, if things are 20 years old, some of that stuff is 25, 30 years old, or 20 years old for sure. You know, you have to minus that out of the age and change your amortization back for that. So, like I said, I would say that's the first step, and then, like I said, if we're honestly budgeting, we should start paying for those things in advance. You know, start setting up that money aside. And when Joe Blow on 4th Street Northwest says, why are my taxes going up? And you can honestly say it's because we have to pay for these parking lots. We'll start figuring out how much parking we should have and who should pay for it real quick.
I know those businesses that have to build their own parking spaces, or, you know, their own parking lots and maintain them, would obviously agree that they're taking care of their own parking lot, plus their taxes are going towards taking care of the movie theater parking lot, et cetera. So they would I mean, not that they're opposed because it does bring business into town, that's not what I mean. What they're saying is that when it comes time for a major improvement, they would like to see those businesses that use the lots possibly pay for those improvements rather than it, being out of the general fund. So, I mean, day-to-day maintenance, I haven't heard nearly the complaints, but I do hear those, what are you going to do when you have to replace that parking lot? How are you going to pay for that?
And we need to remember, I would say, is that it's not a black or white thing. I mean,
No.
if a person goes to the movie theater, there's a good chance maybe they walk across the street to a restaurant that has their own parking lot or whatever, or goes to Cabela's that has their own parking lot. So what we're trying to build, I would think, is something that works together and not apart. But
Yeah, and like I said, the day-to-day operations, the snow removal, stuff like that, those are things you need to keep a business open. I think it's the cost of replacing the entire parking lot is where they're kind of wondering.
We're just taking the proactive approach instead
Yep.
of being reactive on this, waiting
Yep.
for it to happen and then going, now what do we do?
And if anybody's watching, take a look at the packet. You can download it online and take a look at the spreadsheet that Grand Forks uses. It's very well thought out. It takes the total spaces you might need for that business, subtracts the number of spaces you actually have of your own that you maintain, and the net number is the amount that you'd be billed for. So if you have the spaces you need as a business in that district, you would not be charged for a space. If you have 3/4 of the spaces you need, you'd only be charged for that overage. So that's a really neat system that they came up with that we would want to work, I think, along that line.
Company like Cabela's wouldn't pay anything because they've got their own lots. And they're kind enough to let everybody use them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anything else? Move for adjournment.
Move.
Second.
Yeah.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Meeting adjourned.
Well, we'll see you.